think we're all set. So welcome. This is the Margaret Sinclair Award Lecture, Connecting Research and Practice. What can we learn about high quality mathematics teaching? And again, congratulations to Chris Suurtamm, the 2020 Margaret Sinclair Memorial Award winner. It's what we're a big part of what we're celebrating here today. We are on Zoom today. So we'll quickly go through a few ground rules just to make sure we're all comfortable and able to participate and discuss some great ideas today. Before we do that, though, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which the Fields Institute for Research in Mathematical Sciences resides is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We'd like to acknowledge and express gratitude to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabeg peoples who continue to share their ancestral lands with us. For the ground rules, so quick couple things. So you'll want to leave your microphone on mute unless you're sharing, and that applies for mainly the breakout rooms. Just in general, for the sake of bandwidth, some folks are on slightly weaker connections, so it's worthwhile to not always have the video on, although I think it's nice to see everyone's faces. We'll, as usual, we always try to encourage an engagement in respectful discourse and a positive collegial atmosphere. We are going to share a link over here into the chat, and this is just an open access for a survey, and it's really just to, in case there's any thoughts, positive feedback, anything like that, any feedback that you'd like to share with the steering committee to make the forum even better. We'd love to hear it. So we'll be posting that at some point during the session. All right. Would there be any reports from the OAME, OMCA, OCMA, OCMC, CMESG, CMS, CME, MKN, AFMO, or others? We do have something posted here from the OAME, but if there's anyone else who would like to chime in, just drop a message in the chat. Okay, well, I guess we'll start off with the update from the OAME. Judy, would you want to give this one?
Thanks, Charles. Yes, OAME and AFMO project is still going on to support teachers in implementing the new elementary math curriculum in Ontario. And just so you know that a new series of webinars is just starting up to introduce the lesson and assessment plans that are being posted as we speak on the Ontario Math.support network. And so you can go to Ontario Math.support to sign up for these webinars. There'll be webinars in English and in French to introduce all of the lesson plans for coding, mathematical modeling, financial literacy, and number with a focus on fractions. And the webinars are being organized by grade band. So there'll be primary and junior and intermediate focused webinars. Thank you.
Right, and another quick update, we are going to be collecting nominations or submissions for the Margaret Sinclair Award for next year. So that's just something that we'd like for you all to be aware of. If you know of someone who's done amazing things in mathematics education and deserves to sort of be in this Hall of Fame, then please make your submissions sometime in the next year. So this is the schedule for today. I don't know, Kara, if you wanted to jump in here, or if I should continue. I think it's on me here, right? Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. So for the schedule for today, we're going to start off with the reports here, and in just a few minutes, I'll be handing it off to Walter Whiteley, who will be speaking a little bit about our Margaret Sinclair Award winner today. We'll be having a presentation of the award by Deirdre, Dr. Deirdre Haskell, as well. That'll be followed by the award lecture itself, on the topic of connecting research and practice. What can we learn about high quality mathematics teaching? So at 11:25, we're going to get into a series of short, relatively short sessions from Carly Berquist, Amy Scales, and Kelly McKee. And so we'll be discussing the mathematics of a transforming Ninja Star and other stories from the classroom, explorations in equity, classroom practices for equal opportunity learning, and the power of collaboration, learning with and from teachers. That's going to be followed by a breakout discussion at 12:25. We're going to have a total of 3 rooms. You know, if you have an opportunity to have the latest version of Zoom installed as of the past 3 or 4 months, that'll make it easy for you to jump directly into whichever room you'd like. So it's going to be 1 room per each of these talks, followed by all 3 talks. If you don't have the most up-to-date version of Zoom, you might have some trouble getting into the room you want. You might not see the option. So if you have that, if you're having that trouble, just shoot a message onto the chat and we'll help guide you through. All right. Before we continue as well, I just wanted to make a quick mention that these sessions are going to be filmed. So both the main session is being recorded right now. So if you don't want your face or your name to be captured, you can rename yourself right now on Zoom. And in addition to that, the breakout sessions as well are going to be recorded. So if you'd like to not be recorded, then you know, we would ask that that you possibly refrain from the discussion, or we may, if we're getting a couple of requests like that, we may end up just creating a separate room that just is not recorded, just so the discussion can continue. I'm seeing here, it's a quick update from David Benoit. I don't know if you wanted to say it, if you wanted to speak to it, if you might have a moment. Actually, you don't. So anyways, I invite you all to check out the update here for the colloque du GDM, which is happening in early June. And this is for which organization, David? Sorry.
There we go. Bonjour, hello. The GDM is the Direction of Mathematics Association of Quebec, so Francophone CMSG if you want. But everybody's welcome. It's happening in French mostly, but everybody's welcome to come and practice and learn not just French, but also other ways of seeing science there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's great. All right, with that, I'll be handing it over to Walter Whiteley. And I'll stopping the share here.
Okay. I seem to have lost my camera in the process.
We can hear you well, though.
Okay, my camera was on earlier, but it seems to have changed its mind, as it were. All right, let me say a few words about Margaret. I started to list all the things I knew that Margaret had done, and I'll say I became exhausted. So I'm not going to give you a full story. At one point, when I was working with her, she said, "I have taught every grade from kindergarten through PhD." So that says something about her career. She taught elementary school, did a degree by correspondence, a bachelor's degree by correspondence from Waterloo, while raising 5 children, returned to high school teaching, and did a master's degree in mathematics for teachers, which is where I met her in a course. And then she became a vice principal, and of course continued to start a PhD at OISE. So after 1 year, took a 1 year leave to complete that PhD, and I'll mention I ended up on her supervisory committee. And then she was hired at York University in the Faculty of Education. Where I continued to work with her as a colleague and collaborator. And I try to think what is perhaps of interest to other people. Throughout all of this, she was active in the OAME and the Scarborough chapter of OAME, the Junior Olympics, Math Olympics, helped host the Canadian Mathematics Education Study Group at York University. I was on the organizing committee, but she clearly was the dominant force in getting it to happen on time, in spite of the fact that there was a strike just finishing at York and we had to shuffle a bunch of arrangements and so on. But she was undaunted, very organized, got it all to happen, and was consistently developing communities of people. She and I worked together on some research projects involving spatial reasoning. I'm just trying to figure out where I am in my notes. Yeah, we were looking at spatial reasoning, both activities that could be done in the classroom and what supports teachers would benefit from in order to improve their own spatial reasoning and their own ability to support that. Through that period, among other things, we co-supervised a postdoc for Amy Mamalo, who is somewhere in the room. We just were working together through until she became ill and had to take a leave from York University. I will say, I think she was a model of what it's like to be spending your lifetime regularly contributing to mathematics education. And that's really, that's really, I think, what the award was designed to recognize, is people who are spending many years contributing to mathematics education with impact locally, nationally. And Margaret also did some international things with the ICME. And I will say that all of these are qualities that I know are in the career of Chris Suurtamm, and so I look forward to hearing more from Chris. And I think that's probably enough.
All right, thank you so much, Walter. For the presentation of the award, I'd like to invite Dr. Deirdre Haskell to unmute herself and come online.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for unmuting me, or allowing me to unmute myself. And just before I start with the presentation of the award, I'd like to take advantage of my podium here to advertise another event which is happening coming up on March 8th, the International Women's Day, where the Fields Institute is having an event called the Home Advantage, and it's about encouraging women in mathematics. And it will be an interview with myself and my sister, Kimra Haskell, who's a professor at University of Southern California, and we'll talk a little bit about just what it's like to the possible difference it makes to be growing up in a sisterhood of mathematics. And so that's an event that you might like to tune into, or have your students tune into. So welcome to the Fields Institute for Research in the Mathematical Sciences. And we've already had the land acknowledgement, but I'd just like to say it again, that to take a moment to acknowledge that the Fields Institute itself is located on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississauga of the Credit River. And even though we're not at the Fields Institute today, it's we're all sitting on traditional lands of some peoples, and it's worthwhile to remember and to think about how we can acknowledge that and recognize it in our daily lives. So Walter has told us something about the life and work of Margaret Sinclair. And today we remember her by recognizing the achievements of another person who has spent her working life engaging passionately in the cause of mathematics education. Chris Suurtamm is a professor of math education and vice dean of research and professional development at the University of Ottawa. And through her career, she has been a learner of mathematics, a teacher of mathematics, and a teacher of teachers of mathematics. And I think that we all know through personal experience the difference that a teacher can make in the lives and influence that the teacher can have on the lives of the students that they teach. But also the teacher of teachers has a profound effect on, and perhaps has a wider dissemination of their influence. And so both roles are, of course, incredibly important, and which one is more satisfying perhaps depends on the individual. Chris's dedication and service to the community of math education is reflected in the long list of organizations that she has served in as a member, as a chair, as a co-chair, as a board member. And these include the International Congress of School Effectiveness and Improvement, the Canadian Math Education Study Group, the International Congress on Math Education, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, the Ontario Association of Math Educators, and the steering committee of our very own Fields Institute. In her extensive research, she brings her personal experience to bear by valuing teachers' professionalism and knowledge. For Chris, the classroom teacher is a partner in moving towards an inquiry-based curriculum. She stands as a role model for all of us of what can be achieved in a career. It is a pleasure and honor to present the 2020 Margaret Sinclair Memorial Award to Dr. Christine Suurtamm. And I don't have an award to present, but here we are.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. Yeah, it's hard to hear all those accolades, but thank you so much. And thank you to the committee and to Margaret Sinclair's family, to my colleagues, to other researchers, to other people within the math education community and the education community at large. It is really all about partnerships with everybody. You know, Margaret Sinclair and I, our academic paths had some similarities, and in fact, they crossed one another. Margaret and I both began or had instances of being a secondary mathematics teacher within our career. We both did our doctorate at OASE and at roughly the same time, so we did cross paths. And also we were at York University together for a year. I was a seconded professor, and then I went to the University of Ottawa. So this is, you know, more than just an award. It also means something personally in terms of Margaret's work and the excellence that she had. So thank you very much.
Well, it's a great pleasure. And I think now is your opportunity to give us your talk on connecting research and practice. What can we learn about high quality mathematics teaching? Please, Chris.
Great, thank you. Just getting organized here. Okay, I'm assuming you can see it.
Looks good.
Okay, great. Nobody said anything. I was a bit worried. So thank you. So this talk is about connecting research and practice because as even Deirdre mentioned, to me, it's very important to value teacher voice. And it's not about bringing research to practice, but it really is about how do we value practice and the kinds of things that we can actually learn by working with teachers. So an overview of the session, I'll begin by talking a little bit about my positioning. In other words, the kinds of things that I believe in. I'm going to do an overview. I think the advertisement said 3 research projects, but the more I built this, I thought, oh gee, I'm going to pull in a 4th one. So just an overview of those projects. And then kind of across the projects, what are some things that we learned about teaching that actually support student learning? And what have we learned about actually supporting teacher learning? And it's interesting, as I saw the list of participants, I saw participants today. I see many of you who were participants in some of these research studies. So it's really nice. And in fact, I think some of you may recognize yourselves in some of the slides and some of the discussion. So my work really does value and look towards that critical role of the teacher. We know that a lot of research has identified that it's not necessarily the curriculum, it's not necessarily what resources we use, it really is what the teacher does and what the teacher thinks, what tasks they give to students, what tools they give, how do they listen and respond to student thinking that really make up the difference in terms of the development of students' understanding of mathematics. And that's really the heart of the work that I do. And I think it's the heart of what we as math educators need to look at and pay attention to. Also, my focus is really on what can we learn from teaching. There's quite a bit of literature in mathematics education that really talks about shifting practice. And in a sense, it's to me a bit of a deficit model in terms of what it means to look at teaching. Rather than thinking about shifting practice, what I like to do is really think about noticing what is it that teachers do and think, and how do they negotiate that thinking and doing in practice? What are those day-to-day decisions that they make as they work with students, as they listen to their thinking, as they provide next steps for students? So really the idea is thinking about noticing and paying attention to teachers' mathematical thinking and pedagogical thinking within their own math classroom practice. There's been a kind of a series of research that talked about teachers noticing what students are doing. I think that some of my focus is researchers noticing what teachers are doing and paying attention to that. I also have a view of learning as situated, not necessarily individual, but it is my focus on collaborative work, and my stance of inquiry is really thinking about me as a researcher inquiring into what is happening within those classrooms. But I also see teachers adopting the same stance of inquiry to see what is happening within their classrooms. So it's very much about teachers working collaboratively, and working collaboratively also with researchers. That helps to, my work is often trying to create a situation that would help teachers to share their ideas collectively, to think about what they'd like to work on, and to be able to support and facilitate that kind of learning and engagement that teachers are interested in doing. And I find that I learn a lot by doing and being in those situations. So the reason I bring up the Pi Lab, so the Pi Lab is a lab that was funded by the Canada Foundation for Innovation when I actually first began as a researcher. And we named it the Pi Lab, not just because pi is my favorite number, but it really is about promoting inquiry. And that's what the PI kind of stands for in this case, is promoting inquiry in terms of doing research, but also promoting inquiry within the mathematics classroom. So it's sort of iterative in terms of the levels of inquiry, the researcher inquiring, the teacher inquiring, the student inquiring, and we could blow that system up to be even bigger. And so within this Pi Lab, we have one room where we're analyzing data, and we have another room that's actually set up for collaborative inquiry, where teachers might be sitting around together discussing teaching. One project I'll talk about, they're actually sitting around looking at videos of one another teaching as a way to spur a discussion, not to evaluate or critique the teaching, but to spur a discussion about, hey, I do that too. And to then spark a discussion about what they really value in terms of their teaching. another viewpoint is that I have is that research is really based on relationships. And, you know, I think sometimes people discuss, oh, gee, it's hard to find a research setting. And I find that so much about research settings is it's not about finding a research setting. It's about all of the various things that we've already done together with people that build relationships and trust that provide particular research settings. And although today a lot of my focus is really about the connection between research and practice, I also extend that to policy because a lot of the work I do is not only with practitioners, but it's also with policymakers in terms of work with the Ministry of Education. And I should mention that this picture is a picture of some tiles. I was at a conference in Lisbon, Portugal last February before all this started, the last time that I was anywhere. At the Faculty of Education, these tiles were part of a design that was on the wall of the Faculty of Education. And I had to take a snapshot of it because it was an ICME study that was about teachers working collaboratively. So I really thought that this kind of embodied some of that partnership and the way we think about those kinds of connections. So I'm sure that any of you who know me knew that there had to be a fractal somewhere in this presentation, because when we think about those communities of learning, I also think about those communities of learning being nested within other communities. And it reminds me of a fractal image, and I have a simple one there that I created, where we see that each of the communities are gathered together and connected, but they all resemble kind of the bigger community in a sense. So I really see the fractal model as we have the self-similarity that I spoke about, but it's iterative. So in other words, the ideas from one community feed into another community and then feed back again. So it's nested and it really thrives on reciprocal feedback. So a lot of this is kind of grounding how I think, which is at least helpful to me in terms of being able to talk about some of these projects. So I'm going to be talking about 4 research projects, and I'm going to be leaning on these 4 projects. And so the idea is the first thing is I'll give you a brief overview of the focus of the project, who was involved in the project, what the data collection, et cetera, might have looked like. And then we're going to look at across these projects, what were some possible themes that came out. And I think that kind of makes sense rather than repeating the results of some of the projects and saying, didn't I hear something like that before in another project? So I'll do the connecting for us. And these are over time. So it is a set of work. It's not all of my work, but it's a set of work that I feel kind of connects. So one project that some of you who are there today at Fields actually took a part in, it was called the Curriculum Implementation in Intermediate Math. And it's quite some time ago, there's no doubt about it, because it was after the curriculum came out around 2005. And it was particularly focused on, I think the question that was asked to us is the curriculum working? And I think the answer that we responded was, well, let's actually see what's happening in classrooms. It's not as though we can just ship that curriculum out and then check out whether it's working. It really is about, again, what is it teachers do and think in a classroom? How do they interpret the curriculum? How do they make sense of the curriculum? What does it mean to them on a day-to-day basis? A curriculum is not something that's static, but it's dynamic as a teacher interprets it and acts it and moves into their classroom. You can see this fractal image again. It's another fractal. I got to talk about it. And it was part of our logo for this project because it actually was built out of Pythagorean theorem relationships, if you can see those in there. Because the Pythagorean theorem is kind of a big concept that they learn across, we were looking at the grades 7 to 10. So it's kind of it's kind of cool always when kids say, oh, I learned the Pythagorean theorem today. Or at least I think it is. So these are the research contributors, and it was actually funded by the Council of Ontario Directors of Education and the Ministry of Education. And I do refer to the Canada Foundation for Innovation because they provided the infrastructure for us to do this extensive research, because it was quite a large project. My colleague Barbara Graves and I were co-investigators in this project. We consulted with other people, and you can see that there was a long list of research assistants, many of whom have now gone on to do graduate work and have PhDs of their own. And it was great to work with such a large team. So the focus of this research was really to determine how the intermediate math curriculum is understood and taught, to determine how teachers might have been supported in the implementation of the curriculum, and what other supports they needed at the time, and to describe the environments through case studies where an alignment of kind of the written and enacted curriculum seemed to be evident or was made possible to look at kind of what does that look like and how was that supported. So some of the research components in this was an analysis of the math curriculum and supporting documents. We had interviews with leaders in mathematics education. We actually had focus groups with OAME and OMCA to get their take on things and also to help us shape the design of the questionnaire. And then we had a questionnaire for mathematics teachers in grades 7 to 10 that was sent to the mathematics teachers. And we had over 1,096 participants, and that was across the province. So that was kind of a nice number to get a sense of their practices, their beliefs about mathematics and mathematics teaching, their assessment practice, as well as their instructional practice, and what they saw they needed in terms of support for their own professional learning. Another project then was assessment practices and dilemmas. And my colleague Martha Coach and I were involved in this project. And what we were looking at was we were seeking to describe teachers' assessment practices and to be able to kind of explore the dilemmas that they faced in implementing new assessment ideas. And in a sense, we began the project by actually looking to discuss their assessment practices, but the more we moved forward and we looked at the discussions that occurred, the idea of their dilemmas in practice actually kind of arose for us. So this was a 2-year project. It involved 2 different school districts. It involved 42 teachers of mathematics in a variety of different grades. And we met in groups of 8 to 12 teachers, generally around a particular set of grades so that they were not too far apart. We met twice each term to discuss the ways that they were incorporating new ideas in their assessment practices. This was audio recorded and described. And our unit of analysis was the themed conversations. You'll also start to notice sometimes in the right-hand corner on the bottom, there might be a little icon because I'm starting to introduce those icons because when we look across the projects at what are some of the themes, I've tagged where that information is coming from by those icons, but I'll review that again with you later before we look at that. So what did we seek to do when we were doing this project? Well, we really, as well as gathering data, we really wanted a forum for teachers to explore their own experiences with assessment and to engage in dialogue that was meaningful to their classroom practice. So we would actually meet after school. We'd provide a light dinner and a space for us to chat about things. It was surprising how many teachers were interested in participating in this. It was outside the school day. They were giving up their time, but they really wanted that opportunity. As I would mention here, to engage in that dynamic and iterative cycle of discussion with colleagues. So we talk about ideas, they would share ideas, they might go back to their classroom and try out one of those ideas. We never mandated this, but they would pick up ideas from colleagues and then they'd come back and they might talk about how they changed it, adapted it, how it worked, how it went, how their students responded. And all of those conversations and some of the artifacts that they used were recorded. A third project then, which is a pretty large project, was a 2-year collaboration between the Ontario Ministry of Education, the Ontario Association for Math Education, and the University of Ottawa research team. And this project is fairly recent. And in fact, although we've written reports, we've had a few theses come out of this, there's still a lot of data that we have that we're working with, and there's more to come on this project. So the research contributors with to this project and the research team, I led the team. I had research collaborators from other universities, project manager, and many different research assistants who were engaged in this project. And I tried to engage as many research assistants as is workable. We needed many for this project because it gives research assistants an experience in terms of ways to connect research and practice and ways to actually conduct research. And it supports them to be part of a team to really get an understanding of research as they start to think about their own research and their own thesis. So for this project, the funding was provided to the Ontario Association for Math Education from the Ministry of Education to develop a professional learning initiative. It was around supporting 10 particular school teams, which I'll call professional learning communities, to work collaboratively to focus on basically grade 9 applied mathematics. So in other words, what are ways that they could enhance their teaching to, let's say, better address the needs of grade 9 applied students. So not that they were doing anything wrong, but some of the provincial data from EQAO in particular, the province was worried about some of that. So what might we be able to do about this? So it really, the focus was on supporting teachers' work in ways that ultimately would enhance the student learning. And there was a research component. So there were many players in this particular project. There was OAME, the Ontario Ministry of Education, and University of Ottawa research team. And what we were doing was we were supporting the teams with resources, research, and ideas that they felt that they needed. So let's say a PLC decided, gee, I wish I could find out a little bit more about whatever. The research team would come together and help to provide them with sometimes a workshop or resources or a book they might suggest as a book study or an article or a particular activity. But we also wanted to be able to describe the team's processes, investigations, goals, etc. So we were documenting their work. So each of these PLCs was, and there were 10 of them across the province and quite far apart, in fact, and we did that on purpose. They involved an administrator, a mathematics department head, or a school board lead, 2 to 3 teachers of grade 9 applied math, a special education teacher, student success teacher. And the teams were provided with funding to be able to meet monthly for a full day. So in other words, that would be supply teacher costs during the 2 different years, 2014 to 2015 and 2015 to 2016. Their initial meeting really was focused on them deciding what are they going to work on, what kinds of things did they want to work on. And a research assistant was assigned to each of those 10 PLCs. So every time that PLC met, the research assistant would be attending that monthly meeting. It would be audio recorded, and they might be taking other notes or collecting artifacts. So you can imagine how much data was collected during that. As well, we also had meetings where we networked and got those teams together and shared the learning and started to build a bigger network. So each of these PLCs really determined what they wanted to work on. So yes, we were working on grade 9 applied mathematics, but they might decide what they'd like to work on. Would they like to work on maybe developing the use of rich tasks? Would they like to work on focusing on thinking about shifting their assessment practices or incorporating more formative assessment? So there are many different things that they decided to work on, and it was quite interesting. We had to start networking the teams because as a research team, we'd meet and a research assistant might say, oh, the group I'm working with is working on assessment and rich tasks. And somebody else said, oh, my PLC is working on technology and rich tasks. And we started to realize that the teams, the PLCs really needed to be talking to one another. And so we set up opportunities for them to be able to do that. And as we studied this, each PLC then was considered to be a case in a multiple case study project. And as I said, they were assigned a research assistant who was with them for the entire project. Sometimes people graduated and so on. So that's why on the previous couple of slides, you saw that some were year 1 and some were year 2. As well, a researcher would also visit the site at least twice a year. And so the data that was collected were observation notes, short focus group interviews, artifacts, individual interviews, and also we would also document when we were coming together at particular moments in time and the kinds of things that were happening then, and getting different groups together to start to do some networking. So a fourth project, of which I was a part, so I wasn't managing this entire project, was a pan-Canadian project, which was observations of pedagogy. And you see a long list of researchers there. And this research was supported by SSHRC. And the researchers, if you, some of you actually are here, come from a variety of different places across Canada, and some are outside of Canada right now. And our focus in this project was to, first of all, think about what are some research methods that we could develop and use. What we were not doing is we were not observing classrooms and recording what is it teachers do. What we really wanted was a methodology that would provide us insight into how do teachers view what they do. And as they view what they do, what kinds of things seem to bubble to the surface in terms of what they actually value. And so this study actually involved teachers and researchers in Alberta, New Brunswick, Ontario, and Quebec, and it involved both Anglophone and Francophone teachers and researchers. So it didn't hit every province, not quite fully pan-Canadian, but we did have representation of several different provinces. And in each of these situations, we worked with teachers of grade 7. Sometimes we had to use grade 8 or grade 6, but generally grade 7. And we would work with small groups of 4 teachers. So they would kind of be our hub. And so the research in Ontario is what I was involved in, along with a research assistant, Brenna Quigley. And we really focused on 4 grade 7 teachers in Ontario. And we were trying to better understand what teachers value about mathematics teaching and learning and how they negotiate these values in practice. Now, one could just say, so what do you value? But we were able to get much more depth and more authenticity by hearing them talk about their teaching as they actually observe teaching. And I think maybe the next few slides will show you what I'm talking about. So we had these 4 teachers, and we asked them to invite us into their classroom to video record 3 lessons. And they actually could choose which lessons they would like us to come in to record. So picture those 4 teachers with 3 video recorded lessons. And what you need to understand is those video recordings of their lessons were not actually our data. Because what we did is then we had, let's look at meeting 1. So we had meeting 1 with those 4 teachers in that PyLab setting that you saw with people sitting around the table. And we viewed on meeting 1, we happened to view, you can see from teacher A, we viewed lesson B, and teacher B, we also viewed lesson B. So you can see that, and it wasn't the full lesson. The teachers actually worked with us to decide how to break down the lesson that we video recorded into about 20 minutes. And in so doing, they actually started to talk about what they valued. It was really quite interesting because they were saying, oh, nee, what I want in this video is, I don't want me talking. I want to see what that group was working on. Or I want to follow this group and how they were thinking about the math at the beginning of the lesson and how they thought about it at the end. So that itself was already quite interesting. But then we got the 4 teachers together, and so we watched 4 short 20-minute videos of their teaching. And what we video recorded was their discussion about the video recordings that they were observing. And in that way, that video recording was actually what our data was. So it was teachers talking about their teaching and the teaching of others. Again, in most cases, it was not evaluative. It was often a teacher would say, oh, wow, I do that too. Or, oh, that's similar to the problem I gave them. And it was actually those kinds of moments where we would stop the video and they would have a discussion about particular aspects of their teaching. So that's what meeting 1, 2, and 3 were about. And then now this is pan-Canadian. So we have everybody in those provinces doing the same thing or somewhat of the same thing. And then we kind of traded videos. So my group of 4 would be watching videos from other provinces. And again, we'd be video recording their watching of that. So it was kind of a complex and interesting design. And as you probably saw on that first slide, we just have a book that came out. I'm not trying to sell the book, but because all of the data and all of the richness was too hard to put into just one article. So we put it together in a book. And that was hard too. So now we're going to talk about, so what did we learn from these 4 studies? And I'm just going to give you a few snippets in terms of what did we learn. And as I mentioned to you before, there's going to be on each of the slides that I happen to bring up, because it will be integrating these different projects. Those little icons that, if I did my homework correctly, might appear in the corner of each slide, so you know which project they're coming from. And to tell you the truth, I think it's also so I'll remember which project they're coming from. So if we move forward. First of all, so I'm going to talk about 2 things: the teacher practices that teachers engaged in that supported student learning, and then what kinds of things did we actually learn about teacher learning and ways to best support teacher learning. So, so if we just kind of jump around, so what did the OAME PLCs work on, for instance? So those are the 10 PLCs that were across the province. And remember that I said that each of these PLCs decided what were some aspects of teaching practice that they wanted to work on. And so these were some of the things that they worked on. Now, it's not as though each of these individual things was, oh, PLC 1 worked on that, PLC 2 on that. It was a 2-year project. They actually had quite a bit of time because they'd meet once a month for a full day, and then they try out some of these things in their classroom. They're all in the same school, so they would often continue the dialogue. But it might be as though they might start looking at, let's say, the design and implementation of rich tasks. And as they did that, what it did is it prompted them to start thinking about, maybe let's look at our assessment practices, because if this is what we're doing in terms of teaching, I maybe need to rethink the way I was actually doing assessment. So I often find in my research that as teachers work on one aspect of their practice, then quite often what happens is they start thinking about another aspect of their practice. So although the umbrella for this particular project was, let's think about ways to teach to best address the needs of our students, what are some new practices or other practices, or enhance our practices to better address their needs. That umbrella encompasses all these things, and actually it kind of, they kind of blur the lines. So it was enhancing student engagement. A growth mindset was kind of a hot topic at that time, and so many were talking about that. It still is a hot topic. I didn't mean to dismiss it, but reorganize or resequencing the curriculum. So in other words, they were working on the curriculum in a particular way. Many of them decided, oh, I think let's switch this up. Sometimes we start with a lot of number work and review work. And you know what? What that tends to do is those students who were not good at grades 7 and 8 just gets reinforced, that feeling that they're not good at that. And those who were good, do they need this review? And I'll say good in quotes. So sometimes it means let's start with a topic that looks a bit different and everybody's in the same kind of place and there's equal opportunity. So it could be a number of things. Or they often were doing a spiraled curriculum. which would be matched with the idea of rich tasks. So in other words, they might have started to use a series of rich tasks. And I had one group who said, let's see how these rich tasks actually address the curriculum expectations. And let's develop a curriculum around these rich tasks, and they would match them to the curriculum expectations. Another group started to realize that many of these strategies that I'm using in grade 9 apply. It work equally in grade 9 academic and equally in grade 11 and 12. So it was kind of a sea change. And in fact, in some schools where I say blurring the lines, they started to combine the grade 9 applied and academic together, kind of a precursor to what we know will be happening with the Ontario curriculum next fall. So all of these things were not isolated topics, but they were all integrated. So talking about the SIM project, so as I say, I'm jumping back and forth. We had those, we had 9 case studies in classrooms, and for each of those case studies, a researcher would be on site for a week, video recording the teacher's classroom. These were grade 7 to 10 classrooms, and we could see a lot of evidence of opportunities for problem solving, using a variety of forms of assessment, encouraging mathematical communication, and the use of mathematical thinking tools. And I'll give you an example of some of those in just a minute. And remember, that was an earlier study, so we were seeing those things. We're talking about 15 years ago. In fact, one of those case studies was a case study with Angela, and I've talked about Angela so much that sometimes when I actually see her somewhere, I can't remember her first name because in my mind, she's always Angela. And you've probably, some of you have probably seen this particular activity. I've used it in some of my presentations. But it was very interesting because she would start off with the students working on this activity, and they would be working in pairs, and she would pay close attention to their thinking. It was just fascinating to see what the students were coming up with, as well as the way she sequenced and selected the student work to share. And I often use this as an example of those of you who might be familiar with the 5 practices from Peg Smith and Mary Kay Stein. But in fact, Angela's work was a precursor to the publication of the 5 practices document. But she actually was anticipating what students might come up with. Those of you who have used this task know that students might approach it using some algebraic reasoning, using substitution. They might approach it using proportional reasoning. So she was able to see not just did they use manipulatives or draw diagrams, but what were the different mathematical ideas that came out of this particular task. And then she would ask students to share their thinking. Not everybody, so it was not a free-for-all and not a show and tell. She would be very particular about which group she would ask to share, in some sense, so that they kind of represented the thinking of other groups. And it wasn't about creating a hierarchy of the thinking. It was just to make sure that all that thinking was valued, and she would help to make connections. And this is discussed in one of those What Works monographs that we did, because again, I think it's important to share back the thinking that teachers have shared. This is one case where I learned a lot from Angela. The use of rich tasks we also saw in the OAME project. And in fact, I don't have the website here, but Math for the 9, some of you are familiar with, actually has many of the tasks that teachers started to use. So this one is the painted cube problem, which I think by now has gone around a lot and come from other places too. So it's about if this is a painted cube, and if I dip this painted cube in red paint so that the outside is completely covered, and then if I were to take it apart, so which of the cubes would have just one side painted red, which of them would have 2, which might have 3, would there be any that didn't get painted? And then to think about what happens if I build it with a 4x4. And again, this task is hard to do without a mathematical thinking tool, such as this manipulative, because students would need to build it. In fact, sometimes I give them stickers so that they put the stickers on where the sides might get painted and take it apart. So we saw many teachers trying these problems within the OAME project and coming back to their group and sharing student solutions and talking about those particular ones. And it's not so much, sometimes we had a workshop when we all came together for a summer retreat about rich tasks, because it's not about just the task, it's about how do I facilitate that in particular ways that actually make it rich. So the use of mathematical thinking tools. So I'm thinking back to a particular case study that I did on the SIM project. And the teacher, this was a grade 10 class, and the teacher was like very willing to be on board. We had, again, it's about relationships. We had a good relationship. We would talk through her practice, the kinds of things she wanted to do. And it was so neat because I would let them decide which lesson they would like to invite me in. And she emailed me and she said, Chris, you got to come in. Can you come in tomorrow? Because I'm going to try to use linking cubes to do quadratic equations. And I never tried it before. And I'd like you to be there and video record it. Well, that doesn't happen too often. Quite often, you know, a teacher's nervous, hesitant about the video recorder being in the back unless they've gotten used to it. So it was so neat to hear that the teacher was comfortable enough so that they would invite me in to try something that they hadn't tried. So this teacher first started to talk about how she might model a quadratic relationship using linking cubes with a focus on first and second differences. And then she walked around the room and she would give them a second difference, and they had to work backwards, and they had to create a quadratic that might have that as a second difference and then model it with the cubes. So it was kind of an interesting approach. And you know, sometimes people are hesitant to use manipulatives. I call them mathematical thinking tools. It sounds a bit more sophisticated, and I include in there technology or anything. But, you know, I know that research mathematicians use mathematical thinking tools. So there's nothing wrong with it. I know that Walter could chime in easily to talk about how he's used them in his graduate and undergraduate geometry classes. So another problem, and as I say, many of you have seen these problems, but I want to talk about how they're used, because it's not so much about the problem. In one of the case studies, people were trying to think about, so how can I approach algebraic reasoning a little bit differently than just practicing manipulating equations, collecting like terms? What more is there that I could do in a little bit richer situation? And I think that we recommended to them that they read the book by Bowler and Humphreys about connecting mathematical ideas. And the border problem is one of the problems within that. So the question is, this is a 10 by 10 grid, and how many squares are shaded? And it's not a rush to get the answer. The really crux of this is to think about, how would I figure this out? So I could certainly count, but are there ways to be able to think about it? And the teacher in the videos in this book asked the students, don't talk to one another. First, try to think about it yourself without writing anything down. And then she has them come up with representations of how they solved it. So the discussion within the professional learning community, and this one, I forgot my icon here. This one was really coming up in the OAME project in one of the professional learning communities, but kind of the discussion spread. And one of the teachers in that professional learning community was going to try that with her class. And I recall she kind of thought, well, that's not going to take too long. And it was amazing where she went with it. Now, I'm not using her results. I'm going to talk about how it was actually used within that book, but you can start to see how a teacher might use it and why this might take more than just a couple of minutes. So for instance, students come up with a variety of different representations. So they could think about, well, it's 4 times 10 minus 4, etc. And then the teacher had them think about, now sometimes we grow things much bigger, like, okay, let's do 20 by 20, let's do 100 by 100. But it was interesting to say, no, let's try a 6 by 6. And if we do a 6 by 6, how might these expressions change? And by asking that, they're considering what varies and what stays the same. This seems simple to us, perhaps, but the whole concept of a variable and a constant is not simple if we're looking around grade 7, 8, even 9. And if that foundational understanding is not there, it's kind of hard to move forward. And then the teacher asked them to think about down the road. There was a little bit of work in terms of the 6 by 6 and comparing things. Now try an n by n or an x by x. What might those expressions look like? So as I say, I'm doing this in a couple of minutes, but it could have been a couple of lessons that they explored this whole idea. And look at the expressions that some of the students came up with and how Charmaine and Colin and Joe and Melissa and Tina and Zach's answers might change. Now, this is interesting because it brings up a whole big discussion about many different things. So Colin, for instance, says, oh, 10 plus 9 plus 9 plus 8. Oh, that could be x plus y plus z. So not only are we exploring the idea of a variable, we're also possibly starting to talk about, could I represent that with less than 3 variables? And so what we're starting to talk about are relationships between variables. So I'm just demonstrating this as a way that some of our teachers were working with these problems to go quite deeply into some important mathematical ideas. So another thing that came up was around assessment, and the whole idea of assessment as really paying attention to student thinking. Assessment is at the heart of what I do, but I always find I can't really talk about assessment without talking about instruction because they go hand in hand. Because there are some things that we know about assessment, and that is in terms of sound classroom assessment. We know that it's used to improve teaching and learning. It's not just something we do to evaluate students and provide a report card mark. That it's ongoing and embedded in instruction. So it's not just the unit test at the end of the unit, that it's not an event, but it's a process. So the moment by moment things that a teacher hears, the way they respond to student thinking, the next step that they take is really all about their moment to moment formative assessment, the observations they make, the conversations that they have. It uses a variety of assessment strategies, not just because students need to demonstrate things in different ways or students need multiple opportunities. It really is because if we think about the actions of mathematics, whether it's in the curriculum or the mathematical processes, the actions of mathematics are varied, and I can't actually assess them all with one particular strategy. So that's why I need a variety to be able to assess the different processes and actions that students engage in. That it should be aligned with curriculum and instruction. So the kinds of things I do as part of instructional practices should be similar to what I'm doing in terms of assessment practices. That it should focus on what's important about mathematics. So sometimes people rely on assessments that are easy, but assessments that are easy don't necessarily assess what's important. And what's important about mathematics is sometimes the harder part to assess. But what we assess is what we're telling students is important. So we really need to think about it. And that we need to include students in this assessment process. Assessment is not done to them, but done with them. So I suspect most of you who are attending, you know all of this. Because these are sort of principles of sound classroom assessment. So I'm leaning on some data and kind of, in a sense, looking at some of the evolution of assessment. So this is from SIM, as you can tell by the little icon. And this was from the teacher questionnaire. So you can see that we had over 1,000 respondents. And the 2 questions that are represented here were occurring in different places in the questionnaire. It's just that we happened to put them together. And the question was, what do you use? To what extent do you use the following to get a sense of students' understanding? And another question asked to be able to determine a report card mark. And as I say, this was done, around 2006, 2007. And we could see that paper and pencil tests are still used quite a bit. But what we were focusing on here is we were looking at what practices do they use more often to get a sense of students' understanding than they are for using a report card mark. And for us, and Martha Coach and I wrote about this quite a bit, it really is about some indication of assessment practices that are being used for formative assessment purposes. And so we were kind of unpacking that and what that might look like. And we've unpacked that a little bit in terms of some of the further work that we did and in terms of looking at those case studies. So this is from a case study from SIM. And I was behind the video recorder in the back of this teacher's room. It was a grade 9 applied class. And this teacher has tons of very rich tasks, and the students are always working in groups and having good conversations, and a lot was always going on. So I was somewhat surprised on this day when I'm behind the video camera, and you always have to be careful as a researcher not to show that surprise, because she was using clickers. This is before we had some of those other apps on our phone, and she would put up questions from EQAO, and I thought, well, this is interesting because it felt like she was going to kind of do a little multiple choice kind of test. And how she used it, I actually found kind of fascinating. So she put up this particular question, and she had the students use the clickers to put in what they anticipated the answer would be. And then she displayed this in a circle graph, and it was all over the place, to tell you the truth. And so I thought, well, okay, that's interesting. And then she said, okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to talk to the person beside you, and I want you to convince them why your answer was correct. And so all this discussion was going on, and I was kind of feeling, oh, okay, maybe I see where she's going with this. Very, very interesting discussions that the students were having to talk about the problem. And then she said, okay, now what I'd like you to do is she showed the problem again. Individually, they chose the answer. And lo and behold, time and time again, for a number of these that she did, the circle was almost complete with the correct answer. So I thought it was quite fascinating because she was familiarizing them with those kinds of problems, but using it in a way, in a formative assessment way, she was learning, but also in a way that the students could dialogue and kind of express their thinking and maybe learn how to convince one another and think more deeply about these questions. So it was a formative assessment use that helped to improve student learning. We also had instances of a variety of assessment strategies in the OAME project. Again, sometimes EQAO pops up. That's not the focus of everything teachers do around assessment, but we know it kind of pops up. But we saw others using portfolios where students would be choosing work that addressed particular curriculum expectations, and they'd write about why they were choosing that work. Teachers might be explicit about their learning goals and success criteria. And they were trying a variety of different assessments. I also saw teachers within this project have students who might be uncomfortable talking about why they solved it in a particular way or writing down why they were, using iPads to create their own little video to explain their solution. Another thing, I remember a conversation with a teacher. I was attending their full meeting that day, and they were talking about, they had picked up on Peter Liljedahl's Thinking Classroom. And so they were having students working on whiteboards around some problem solving. And this one teacher was so excited and going on and on about how well it was working. And she would walk around and she would talk to the students. They'd explain what they were doing, and she'd move from group to group. And she was starting to get a good understanding of what was going on. And it was so interesting because I was there for the day, and I often would take them out for lunch. So we went out for lunch at a Thai restaurant. And in the middle of lunch, she said to me, Chris, I don't understand this focus in assessment, because right at about that time, there was a big discussion across the province about using conversations and observations. And she said, I don't understand, like, how can we use conversations and observations in math class? And I was kind of floored by the question. And I said, but you just told me all about how you walked around the room as the students worked on the whiteboard and how you could see and hear their thinking. And she, I mean, it was an absolute aha moment at the table where she said, you're right. And then she was quite quiet the rest of the time. And she was thinking about, okay, what are ways to kind of capture that, recorded, what can I do with that? So it is very interesting as assessment, as those changes in practice occur, that changes around assessment also occur. So going back to those groups that we had where we were meeting with teachers after school so that they could talk about some of their assessment practices and challenges. These were also some of the assessment practices that that group had. Quizzes, math journals, performance tasks, and they had a lot of discussion, and I'll kind of get to that in a minute, about the idea of their having the students work collaboratively on tasks, but what do they do around assessment of that? And there was a lot of discussion and back and forth in terms of how does that work out. And Martha and I were, when we were analyzing this data, we happened to come across Windschittle's framework, and it was very handy, although I don't always like saying Windschittle whenever I give a presentation, but it was very handy, and I don't usually also like putting things in boxes, but it helped us think about the dilemmas that teachers were facing in terms of conceptual, pedagogical, cultural, and political. I'll give you a quick little overview of what that means. So conceptual is about like my understanding of assessment and how that matches. Pedagogical is about how do I go about doing this? Cultural is about, well, I'm trying new assessment practices, but the students in the class are kind of balking at it. They want to know what their mark is, or the person who teaches next door to me. So it's kind of a cultural shift. And political dilemmas are, yes, but there's this policy, and how do I make sense of that? So of course, it wasn't that box-like, because the interconnections between these various dilemmas came up as well. So for instance, in a discussion about collaborative assessment, teachers who have students engage in collaborative problem solving were trying to think about whether they could do collaborative assessment and how that might work. And up came conceptual, political, and pedagogical. So they saw the value of aligning instruction and assessment, conceptual. Am I allowed to do this? It's dealing with what does the policy say? And what does this actually look like in practice? So kind of pedagogical. And they talked about things like, okay, I'm going to have the kids brainstorm together first around this problem solving activity. Go away, think about it on their own, jot down their thoughts, maybe come back, share them. So they were coming up with different ways of doing that. Oops. So this, I say, is putting it all together, but this was the result of our analysis of all those discussions. So that little Canadian flag down there is that Pan-Canadian project, but this is just our analysis of the data with those multiple focus groups with the 4 Ontario teachers, because out of our analysis, we were able to pull what are the things that they're talking about that surface as what they value. And so in a sense, it's kind of putting all of this together. So, and it was very hard to come up with this diagram and think about how do we represent this, but it's about teaching practices. You can see the blob in the middle is about building that classroom environment. We could hear about their goals. And more specifically, you can see the kinds of conversations that we had. So in other words, we have Steve talking. I just have to move something that's on my screen. Steve is talking, whoops, sorry. That he has a lot of students and they seem to know a lot, but often it seems that it's memorized. So really he's considering what do they really understand and how can I see what they really understand, and getting at that whole idea of wanting a deep understanding. And Ellen says, I want them to have them do a lot of talking. And I think in that lesson, they did a lot of discussion of what they knew. So I was able to hear all of that. So you can see these are just a couple of instances, and you can imagine all of the data that went into coming up with this idea of putting it all together. But that focus on listening for student understanding and deepening their student understanding. So just a couple of things in terms of, so what do we learn about teacher learning? Because that's also a big component of the work that we do as we talk to teachers, as they work together. We hear a lot of different things about how they learn. So again, going back to the SIM project, one of the questions was really about what learning opportunities really support their learning. And again, I'll indicate this was a while ago. Math textbooks bubbled to the top. I'm not sure that would be bubbling to the top, but dialogue with colleagues definitely continues to come up as the top thing that teachers talk about as supporting their own learning. So in that sense, for grade 7 to 10 teachers, that came up. And again, from the SIM project, we have several quotes. So for instance, in this one on the left, this was from the questionnaire data. We asked them about how are they learning. They talked about participating in a professional learning group for math. And this is the most valuable experience because I meet with colleagues and discuss strengths, challenges, ideas, assessments. So it's that whole idea that coming together is important. Over on the right, I found that time spent with colleagues is most valuable with a free exchange of ideas. And on the bottom, I think the biggest key is being able to have a good math department with good colleagues. So that would have been a grade 9 or 10 teacher who would have been working in a math department. So this comes up again and again, is the value of having a dialogue with colleagues. From our focus groups on the Pan-Canadian project, many instances. So you need to understand that we would meet after school for these focus groups. It would involve bringing in dinner. And sometimes you can see on the actual transcripts that I often would be saying, okay, I'm trying to be conscious of your time now. It's heading towards 8 o'clock and I know you have to teach tomorrow. And they would keep talking. And I really was trying to be conscious of their time. I wasn't trying to get rid of them. But they would continue talking. And this quote from Trista, you know what, having the opportunity to talk with other teachers who are motivated to talk about teaching is something that you don't always get. And so they valued that opportunity to be able to talk. Something that came up around teacher learning with the PLCs and the OAME project is the fact that we allowed the PLCs to be teacher driven. So in other words, the teachers could decide what they were going to work on and even the ways that they were going to work. So what kinds of things might they do? So they have time to sit down, they have time to plan. And the fact that they were able to take control over what they were learning, they suggest was important to them. And these are some of the things that they did do. So not every group was engaged in all of these, but no group was engaged in only one of these. And they decided those kinds of things that they were going to work on. Whether it's gathering together and designing a lesson, trying it out in different classrooms, and then coming back and sharing student work and observations about how it went. So they came up. And sometimes as a research team, we would provide them with suggestions or books or ideas, or sit with them while they talked about the student work to be able to give them another opinion or somebody to kind of put their ideas against. Another thing that supported teacher learning was administrative support. We saw that come up in many different cases. We saw that in the SIM project, that in particularly the case studies, the case studies were often in classrooms where the teacher was trying many of the things as suggested in the curriculum. The administrator being involved in this seemed to make a huge difference. And the same is true from the OAME project. We purposely had an administrator involved in each PLC so that they could be supportive. And in most cases, the administrator would turn off their cell phone, walkie-talkie, whatever device it was that they could be contacted with, and they would take part in the PLC. And one teacher interview says the administrator is all about supporting us and allowing us to take a chance and take risk. It's huge. And more of us are willing, knowing that we're not going to get burned. So the idea that, in a sense, that principle is setting up a safe workspace, a safe space for teachers to try out new ideas, the same way teachers are setting up a safe space in their classroom for students to try out new ideas. The other thing we saw is the coherence and collaboration. And we saw that in most projects. So in other words, the fact that teachers are getting similar messages from curriculum, supporting documents, professional development, a broader math education community, any literature they might read from NCTM or other sources, and the collaboration of policymakers, provincial math organizations, and teachers and leaders. That coherence and collaboration of messages was huge. So the whole idea was really about kind of structuring as we move forward. And we saw it particularly with the OAME. We tried to be responsive when we realized we needed to get these groups together. And, it was fairly networked. We had the groups of PLCs. We also had a steering committee that was made up of, and you can see the collaboration here, representative, I was on it from the research team. We had project manager from OAME. You can see the Ministry of Education, the Ontario Math Coordinators Association. So we had that network. We also had the network of the research team. So we had research assistants, and we also had research collaborators. So the research assistants were all out with their networked teams. And so if we put this all together, you can see that the structure of that project also helped to support the teacher learning and ultimately the student learning. And I don't know if this reminds you of a fractal, that's okay too. So in that way, some of the learning gets spread a little bit further, and we see teachers collaborating together, sharing ideas together, all in a way to support teacher and ultimately student learning. So thank you. I appreciate you listening. That was a lot of listening, and usually I'm a lot more interactive, but my guess is if you hadn't seen some of those math problems, you might have been working on those. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Chris. So at this stage, we do still have some time before we'll be getting into the next set of talks. So we got about 5 minutes. So if there are any questions, we invite all the participants to either raise their hand or actually ideally just shoot a message in the chat and we can unmute you or read out your question depending on what you prefer. So we're seeing a question here from Howard Goodman. So innovative principals make mistakes. Senior board staff and ministry react very negatively to any mistake. So I think this is in continuation of a conversation regarding the high stakes nature of assessment, how that weaves in, how it overlaps with the role it plays in the formative, from a formative context. So I don't know if you'd want to speak to that, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that's, this is a huge question, right? It's about accountability and what we think about accountability and what it means. And there are various different ways we talk about accountability. So, I think that we need to think about that whole idea of setting up risk-taking opportunities within a math class, within a school that a principal has control over. But maybe we need to think more broadly around board opportunities to take risks and try new things. I mean, I actually think in some cases, some of the boards who have taken some risks and have been a bit rogue, once some of their work gets recognized, then people seem to have interest in it. So it's a tricky thing. And I think we need to think about how actually can we organize systems so that we allow for that creativity and we allow for innovation to emerge. So Brynja had a question. Shall I just pick up some of these?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Are there strategies you use to promote non-evaluative discussions of teaching among teachers? So Brynja, I'm thinking that you mean, is it non-evaluative towards students or non-evaluative about the teaching? Maybe you could just type in that answer.
It's just
I meant about the teaching.
You mean how they evaluate their own teaching or how they
Right,
evaluate their students?
I was thinking of in those video groups where I think
Oh,
a
great.
couple of
Okay.
times where they're not judging each other as their teacher.
That's
as-
great. Okay, that's a good question, because something that actually was quite interesting about that was that when they were watching their own videos or videos of one another, the four of them, because they built up relationships, they were quite comfortable with one another. I found that there was no evaluative discussion because they were watching videos of one another. But I actually found that sometimes when we received the videos from other provinces, sometimes that talk was a little more evaluative. And it's probably because those teachers were not in the room. And it was kind of interesting to see that shift. I haven't written much about that, but it was interesting because then there was more of a comparison, and they would get back on track and notice things that were similar. But I think you kind of need to set the stage and talk about what the focus is. So thanks, Brynja.
excellent. And maybe we have time for just one more question.
Sure. Let me take.
There's a question from Anne here.
Yep.
So she's asking,
Yeah, whether it's less productive. So what I find, Anne, is that sometimes they might begin with a problem of practice that might appear less productive. It seems to be that it's something that they're kind of itching to kind of get a hold on. We were kind of lucky because we had them over 2 years and we would meet with them, and quite often their problem of practice they might recognize was a little bit bigger than that. So if a PLC, you say, decided to design a test to do a better job of streaming students into grade 9, yeah, that would be worth a discussion. So it was interesting because research assistants would be attending those, but that would not necessarily be the kind of discussion that the research assistant might have. It might be one where just because they would feel uncomfortable, it might be where the researcher would come and help people kind of brainstorm, what does this look like? Why would we want to do this? So what are the characteristics? So it's those are tricky situations, but I find sometimes when they begin to work on it, they start to think, okay, maybe the thing is bigger than this and can shift.
I was just interested as a researcher, that was one where I was really stumped because I was trying to support teachers in making their own decisions. And this group was it was a 7 to 10 PLC, but it was totally dominated by the high school teachers. And they just decided that all their problems would be solved if the students were streamed better into academic and applied and locally developed, and that would be all they would need to do. And they were really, so I was just curious on your thoughts, as a researcher, like maybe had there been more upfront suggestions of these are things you could focus on, like in hindsight, I wish I had done more of that.
Yeah, or even, yeah, I mean, sometimes it's tricky getting grade 7 to 10 teachers together. I find that because quite often there's kind of a blame thing, or, there develops a bit of a hierarchy of secondary over elementary, unnecessarily so, because there's a lot to learn from one another. So maybe starting with, I always find I start with things like some problem solving activities that would actually challenge both groups to kind of break down that hierarchy, and then to really kind of talk about other things before I actually get to the problem of practice. So it's, that's a tricky one. Yeah.
Right. I think we're at time here to introduce our next 3 speakers.
Okay, I will stop sharing and thank you all for listening. That was a heck of a lot of listening you had to do.
That was
So
wonderful.
thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Our next speaker is Carly Berquist, and she's going to be speaking to the theme, The Mathematics of a Transforming Ninja Star and Other Stories from the Classroom. Carly, do you have access to your...
So I'll share my screen. Hi, everyone. Okay, one moment. And is that working? You can see.
Perfect, thank you.
Can I just say something, Carly, before you begin?
Sure.
The three people who are presenting are all people who were involved in the research projects I spoke about, which is why I invited them, because we want to continue to learn from the people that are involved in research. And they're not talking about their involvement in that research. I want to hear what they're doing now. So I just wanted to make that clear in terms of that's what the connection is. And it's going to be fun for me to hear too. Thanks.
All right, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Chris, for inviting me to be part of today. It's really exciting to be thinking about teaching. I've been out of the classroom for 2 years working as vice principal, and so still in a school and still around teaching and learning. But I've taken a bit of an opportunity to look back at some of the things I've done. And that is what inspired the title of the talk that I'm going to give. I am going to talk a lot and tell a story. And so that's a little bit to compensate for my nerves, but I think it will be interesting and hopefully spur some discussion in the breakout groups later on. So I landed on this image because it reminded me of a grade 3 and 4 class of students who taught me about the mathematics of a transforming ninja star. And over the years, I've developed a pedagogy of reciprocal learning with students that includes using their voice to inform instruction and looking for sources of background knowledge or schema to build from. I've learned that students become empowered as mathematical thinkers when a teacher finds ways to be crafty themselves. I also believe that this approach is an element of building equity with students. And while I will not take time to talk about it today, it was my work in ELD classrooms with students who had limited or no prior schooling in grades 7 and 8, as well as my work in the North that has really solidified why I do what I do. My work in mathematics education has become about how teachers can use funds of knowledge, the experience and skills of students, the things that they value and know about, to teach mathematics. I am forever looking for better understanding of how listening to student voice, reciprocal learning between student and teacher makes for high quality mathematics education. And my learning about how to be a mathematics teacher has taken me to the Arctic in Scandinavia and Canada, to Nunatsiavut on the north coast of Labrador, and has connected me to people all over the world who are interested in how mathematics education fits within culturally relevant pedagogy. Being able to tap into math moments in real life when we think mathematically and are also doing something we value is an opportunity to make mathematics meaningful in ways that have impact beyond the mathematics classroom. This is a transforming ninja star. It is fun and easy to make, and it can distract 7 and 8-year-olds for hours. One year, transforming ninja stars took over my classroom, and each student had to have one. I could not miss this opportunity to make the most out of student engagement. As students learned to make the stars in different sizes and to varying degrees of accuracy, they were doing math. They were folding, measuring, counting, estimating, problem solving, communicating, and on and on. And so this was a math moment I had to capitalize on. We decided to have a throwing competition to see how far each could go. I cannot remember if we graphed the results, but we could have. When we were finished, I asked my students my favorite question: where is the math? And what I had in my archive were these images of student voice. A transforming ninja star is mathematical because you need to find out how many pieces you need. For fun, you can estimate how far it can go. A transforming ninja star has a lot of equaling. Also, it has shapes. A transforming ninja star is symmetrical, and symmetry is used in math to tell you it's the same on each side. A transforming ninja star is mathematical because when you throw the ninja star, you can measure the distance it flies. Also, you can count how much time you take to make the ninja star. A transforming ninja star is mathematical because when you fit the pieces together, it transforms into an octagon. It has 8 sides, 8 vertices and corners. It does not have any right angles or obtuse angles. It only has acute angles. This example shows one of the reasons why listening to student voice is so important. The student has expressed some misconceptions that can be addressed in a conversation about their ninja star. These notes that students shared show the different ways they think, the ideas and words they have learned at school, and ideas and words that are not so much school. For example, fun. In my mathematics classroom, high quality instruction is achieved when students are able to talk, discuss, challenge, disagree, create, make connections, and feel like they know math because they do. Too often, we work with students who feel like they can't or they don't, who are anxious, who feel like they need to get it right. I have discovered that when you are able to have mathematical conversations with students about things they already know about, their confidence goes up, learning is accelerated, and opportunities to dig deeper or extend emerge naturally. I have long loved this example of a grade 2 student on a field trip to an outdoor education center. Think for a moment what the next questions might be in a discussion with the student about the math that they saw. And it says, today I used math when I saw a chickadee's wings beat really fast. I've been asking students and teachers, where is the math for years now? And I have so many examples of the brilliant things they come up with. It helps me help them as I get to know their thinking and the way they relate to the world. I hope when they leave me, students can see all the math they know and can do and have appreciation that mathematics does not exist on a worksheet, but rather in the problems we solve, no matter how simple or complex they might be. These examples are from grade 7 and 8 students, some of which were in the ELT program. In one other classroom, students became so excited about mathematics that they would come in from recess and tell me what they saw. I have videos I'm not able to share, but they are priceless. Students would save packages from their lunches to show examples of things that they were noticing in their daily life. This emerged during a year of teacher collaboration at a school inquiry about math moments and students making meaning of real life experiences. In 2016, I had the opportunity to work with a group of amazing colleagues in a year-long inquiry into students' understanding of mathematics in the real world. I am sharing these images of what we gathered from students who began collecting math moments for us, literally a graphic organizer with categories, although some students would change them, which was even better, that students would share with us each week. In this whole school project, parents were also involved. The image on the left is our collaboration, looking at our student voice, trying to understand what it meant about student thinking and what we would do with it to create new learning opportunities. This project measured student opinions about using math in daily life, and it was interesting to see how many of them shifted from only when I have to all the time. I don't think a single person in school that year left saying, I'm not a math person. These are some examples from the math fair that we had. And this student, excuse me, has done a project about blue whales for their math fair project and shared, my math moment has deepened my understanding of nature and biology. If I wanted to be a marine biologist, this information could help me. I have learned that math is everywhere and is inescapable. This year in my school, I have noticed a teacher using mathematics in ways that I admire. She teaches grade 4 and grade 5 mathematics, literacy, and social studies. In the fall, chart paper was posted outside her classroom that looked like this. What I saw were students using mathematics to understand the impact of residential school on a community, and a teacher helping students connect the dots between learning math and using math to learn. This was an example of mathematical conversations about colonialism and community building in grade 4 and 5, and it's amazing. The teacher had recognized Orange Shirt Day with their class, and in social studies was analyzing the impact of settlers on Indigenous communities in Canada. The teacher shared with me that this graph was created as a model of student thinking about what they had learned. The students had a story to anchor their thinking, and they were able to guide the teacher's hand and tell what the line should look like. And they understood the trajectory they would take once colonialism had occurred. She did not want to leave it at that. And so she furthered the discussion by shifting to an inquiry about how to regrow a community and what decolonization might look like. I continue to think about what people do and what they say about what they do as a way to make mathematics meaningful for students. How does this way of knowing and connecting empower students to see themselves as mathematical thinkers? What happens for students when they use what they know, even if it is something the teacher doesn't know, to meet learning expectations? Thank you again for sharing this time with me this morning and taking the time to listen. Thank you to Chris, who has taught me so much and created so many opportunities for learning from others. I hope to continue the conversations later on in the breakout groups, and I'm eager to hear what others will share. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. Chris, I'll let you take away.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd like to thank Carly. I had meant to introduce her, but we kind of, I guess maybe I just kind of had a sigh of relief that I was done. Carly is just an amazing person. So Carly is currently a vice principal with the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. And also, along with the amazing work she does as a teacher and an educator, she also just finished within the past year her master's degree. And it was, she worked with Richard Barwell as her supervisor, and I was on her committee, and the work she did really made me think about other ways of thinking about data and analysis. And I mean, that was pretty cool. She taught me a lot. So I would like to say thanks, Carly. Thank you. And I wanted to introduce the next speaker, if that's okay. Okay. So the next speaker is Amy Scales, and Amy was a participant in one of those projects. I'm not saying which one because it's all confidential. And she's a great thinker, and she's a teacher at Listowel Secondary School. I know I visited that school. It was a long journey, and it's a very interesting place. And she is a very thoughtful teacher and thinks very deeply about different ideas. So I can't wait to hear what she has to say.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Chris. Okay, I hope you can see. Let me hit present.
Looks great.
Okay. So I had to make some notes. I actually made 7 pages of notes during the conversation and all the things that we've been thinking about. Oh, probably that's in the way. Okay. So first conversation, oh, record, see, that's why I was supposed to. Are we recording?
No, we've got it. We've got it for this.
Yay, thank you. Okay. The other one was relax and enjoy, and I got really into it, so that's amazing. So at first I had no idea why Chris wanted me to talk. Absolutely, Chris has really influenced the things that I do, has influenced my practice, and I've always really enjoyed the times we've had to work together. So during the one project for sure, but then even, you know, if we would meet at OAME or meet up for some reason, there was always like some stuff. So yeah, I thought, okay, I mean, Chris said, I want you to talk. So I was like, okay, the answer is yes. But then it was kind of concerning. Then I wasn't sure what to do. So let me just, so Chris and I had like a quick chat, and she said, it sounds to me like you're talking about equity. So I guess this is a conversation about explorations in equity. And it's just a series of things that I have continued to think about and sort of dance around between since my work on the project with Chris. So since this is about equity, I thought it was really interesting that when Chris was sharing, she was sharing all these things that like happened in the class when we were in the project. And it just sort of, this like light bulb went off, and I was like, you know what, right now, as a participant in a study, I feel that I was valued and I feel that I'm heard. And I think really number one in equity is making sure that we have a place for every kid to feel valued and heard. And so thank you, Chris, for setting that up in the way that you do, which is always just, well, I made notes. You said tasks, tools, listen and respond to student thinking. But I feel like when I'm a participant, I'm your student. And I felt that and I saw that. So thank you. Okay, so just a little bit about me. I'm wearing the shirt that you see here. It's actually like wrinkled, pictured, because when I'm thinking about the journey that we sort of started with the project with Chris, this was just a little bit after when I got this shirt, which was the Literacy Matters, Numeracy Counts. And I love that that was an OAME shirt because a lot of times literacy was really being valued after the early implementation of like the 2000 curriculum. And so to have this place where you could say, you know what, numeracy counts too, I think that really felt important. So because I've done a lot of reflecting over like the last whatever we started working together, so 12 years or so, I thought this was kind of like reminiscent of that. So there you go. That's my, I don't know, my thinking. The other thing that I've got on here is the yes. Chris said, will you present? And I said, yes. So that's a little bit about me. And the other thing is I am from the Avon-Maitland District School Board, and there's like a little image I stole out of Facebook, but our motto is actually always learning. And I feel like Chris and my work in the classroom have always been around always learning. Oh, see, that's why I got to check my notes. I wanted to make a line of acknowledgement. I apologize. So, especially if we're talking about equity, it's important that we all feel that we are valued, and absolutely. I'm located on the Haldeman Tract, actually. I'm coming to you from Waterloo. And the Haldeman Tract is a very interesting piece of land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations in the 1700s, I believe. And so that's a whole thing. So I am definitely wanting to acknowledge that the land that I am on should actually be not part of Waterloo, should definitely be under the care of the Haudenosaunee. So I acknowledge them, the Haudenosaunee land, and it was also part of the neutral territory of the Anishinaabe, and I just want to acknowledge that land and hope that I'm doing good things on the land when I'm using it. That's how I like to try and acknowledge, is that I'm doing good things. Okay, so I would like to know a little bit about you. I'm hoping that I will be able to see my participants' feedback. Let me just check. They said I could. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so please tell me about you. If you are a math teacher, can you put a coffee break icon? And if you are a supporter of mathematics education, can you use the party celebration icon? So lots of party celebrations. No coffee break. I'm the only teacher right now? Okay. Okay, also, I'm coming to you from Ontario. So I'm hoping that if you are in Ontario, you will put the check mark. And if you are not, then you can put the X. Okay, good to know. So a wide variety of people here. And lastly, I would say, if you're a parent, can you give me a thumbs up? And if you are not, can you give me a heart? Cool. So in the chat, if you don't feel that some of my limited suggestions have included you, I would like you to tell me a little bit more about you, because I want you to feel included.
You might have everyone.
I got one. Couldn't find the icon. Okay, no problem. Awesome. A learner. Thanks, Kelly. Oh, we got more. Oh, Chicago. Wow. Amazing. Thank you. Oops. Okay, so when I was a student, which in the intro write-up part, you may have found out I graduated from the University of Waterloo in 2000. So that means I was a learner a long time ago. But when I was a student, I was actually, I was included in a special group of people that were studying with the Olympiad, but I was invited because I was a girl. All of the people that were training for the Olympiad in that group were boys. And so they were like, oh, we need a girl, come and join us. So interesting. That's not actually where I meant to go with that. But when I was a student who was learning in high school, the only tool I knew was algebra, right? You could do anything with algebra. And actually I found that like super amazing was the way that the teacher that I most identify with, the teacher that spent a lot of time teaching my classes, was able to just pull the algebra together and like they fit together. And that was like mathematical and amazing for me. And I felt like it was really empowering. But algebra was really like my only tool. And so I have the image of the cat food problem, which you can find on the Learning Exchange. And it's from Fiddlesticks. It's another publication from the Literacy Numeracy Secretariat, as Chris had shown one earlier. But when I was a student, the only way I would have solved the cat food problem is with algebra, right? But the reason it's featured in the Literacy Numeracy Secretariat one is all the different ways that we can communicate about mathematics. Going back to when I was in high school and it was algebra, there was the power there and there was like this magic, but there was a definite sense that if algebra wasn't for you, then you didn't belong in math class. And I know this is a while ago now, but I think that's where my first thought around equity became, was that like mathematics is for everyone. Everyone has the right to learn mathematics, and we need to learn to value that not everything requires algebra in order to be doing meaningful mathematics and in order to be thinking and recognized as thinking. So to me, this was an eye-opening problem, because if you look at the publication, you will find so many different ways to actually solve this problem. And so I've been using it for years now, but actually just 2 weeks ago when I gave it to my grade 9s for the recently, a student surprised me and solved it in a different way. So again, it just blows my mind. I keep trying to think, what am I doing? How do we make sure that students can see themselves as mathematicians, students can see themselves as doing meaningful work? So that's why I have this image from Sarah Van Dwerf, because I think in the past, our idea of what is mathematics and who is R, but the societal view of what is mathematics, what is meaningful mathematics, I think that's changing and shifting, but I'm not sure if everyone is changing and shifting. These, especially the part where it says mathematics is a study of patterns, generalizing, describing, noticing, to me, that really speaks to the wide openness of mathematics. But I don't know that parents or society in general necessarily views that as mathematics. So in order to make math accessible to everyone, sometimes we need to change the way that they see the math. Not sure if that's in the way. Okay. So what do we mean when we ask students to engage in meaningful mathematic work? And so I decided to find out what the internet thinks. So I did an image search of Google image search of meaningful math. And this is what I came up with. And some of it is interesting and some of it is not. So I still think that we need to change everyone's perception of what it means to be doing mathematics. And if that can happen, then I think there are more people that can see themselves as doing mathematics, doers of mathematics. Okay. I sort of played with this one. So to me, I think this is meaningful math. I have my algebra tool, but it's not the only tool I have. I also have a tool of patterning, which is really big for me, a tool of manipulatives or technology, or I wish I had written down what Chris called it so that they didn't sound as modeling, as a modeling tool. But I have modeling here. So, and then dialogues with peers or yourself. To me, there's like a whole toolbox when we're actually doing mathematics. And so the math that I got to experience when I was young, I think really sold it short. So I think if we can all see mathematics as a much wider toolbox and a much wider way of perceiving it, then I think we can make math more equitable. Oh my goodness, is it already like that long? Okay, I don't know when to stop. Okay, so that was just why Chris said I should maybe talk about equity. When we were having a conversation, I said, here are some of the things that I've been doing. And of course, Chris says, it sounds like you're working on issues of equity. And then I thought, oh, have I been working on issues of equity? And then I Googled it and she was, and there she was speaking on the Learning Exchange about math equity. Good to know, thank you. Okay, so maybe I need to get into like the meat of it. Okay, so here's where I was like dabbling in equity. The work and the learning that we were doing when we were part of one of the projects with Chris's was the rich tasks. And the rich tasks really took us a lot to get in there, and we have used all of the rich tasks that she shared with us today. And in fact, I think 2 of them I used last week. So kind of exciting. But overall, my approach to rich tasks have also changed as well because of the conversations from that that group. There are people that we still connect with from another school group, and we meet and we chat on Twitter and all sorts of stuff. But it's to drive the mathematics processes. So the learning your rich tasks, and the math processes are the focus, and then we get to meet our overall expectations. And I see that as equity as well, because everyone can have access to those math processes, and then we can like meet them where they are to move them forward. Sorry, there's another chat here. Okay. Okay, so some other things that I have been working on. Low floor, high ceiling tasks shouldn't be a surprising idea. Chris has talked about them as well, but when I'm thinking about equity, if there is a low floor, then it means everyone can get in and everyone can see themselves valued as math thinkers. Thin slicing. So this is something that Jim Pye introduced me to, and Jimmy Pye was one of the researchers on our project, and again we have maintained our connection. And so when I was asking Jimmy to co-plan a lesson with us, we came up with these thin slices of how to introduce the sign law without just telling kids. So we broke it into these little pieces of math that they already knew, and we kept lifting and lifting and lifting. And it was amazing and powerful. So I have been working on trying to get a lot of the ideas into thin slices of, first we're going to start with this little problem, then we're going to go to that one, all within one lesson. And I still think that you're raising the floor every time you switch. Other things that I think are helpful for equity are leveling from the bottom. So that's a part of a thinking classroom move, because if we're moving everybody forward, that doesn't mean we're putting a ceiling on it, right? But we're moving everybody forward, and that means everybody has the chance to do some learning. I think that's really, really important. The visibly random groups makes the accountability piece that students know how to interact. They have to learn how to interact with each other because they're quickly being switched around. Students in their groups are feeling heard. And again, if we're feeling heard, I think we're promoting a climate of equity. And flow. If you can get flow, then every kid has that chance to feel successful. And when everybody feels successful, then again, we're feeling that we belong, we're part of a community, and that's equitable. Okay, I am running out of time, so there's way more other things to talk about. I'm just going to skip that. Okay, so recently as well, I have been doing some learning because I took an FNMI First Nations Métis Inuit AQ, and for part of the work for my AQ, I attended this series. Amazing. I can't recommend it high enough. And also the First Nations Métis Inuit and Education Association of Ontario has resources to support you. So I have been trying to follow up that work by bringing more cultures, not dominant cultures, into my classroom. So again, my students feel like they belong. Okay.
Just say Amy, not May.
That's okay.
Fast typing, fast typing. Thank you so much. Everyone's, I'm sure we have breakout rooms later, which I'm sure everyone is very excited about, that we can carry on with some of that. I'm going to pass the baton over to Chris again, though, to introduce Kelly, please.
Okay, so thank you so much, Amy. It was good to hear about some where you are now and some of the things you've been doing. So next up is Kelly Mackay, and Kelly Mackay worked with me as a master's student on the OAME project, I can say that, and she's currently working on her PhD. But even before Kelly started on some of that work, she was very involved in teacher professional learning and thinking about, we think in similar ways about teacher professional learning. So thinking about what are some best ways to support teachers and just to really be fascinated by some of the things they do and think. So I'll hand it over to Kelly.
Thanks, Chris. Congratulations on your award. So I know I'm the last, and I will try to be succinct in getting us to the breakout room so that you can all talk instead of just listening. Present. I'm going to talk about the power of collaboration and the way that I see we can connect research and practice and vice versa, because in my experience, one informs the other. And so I am a PhD student, but I'm also a part-time professor at the Faculty of Ed. So I get to do both roles, which is very empowering in the sense of applying my research to the classroom. So I'm very fortunate in that regard. So quick history of me. I used to be an engineer. I am still an engineer, but it's not my profession. I found the isolation of an office cubicle not quite fitted to what I consider one of my stronger skills, which is being social. So I tried to think back, when was I last really happy? And it was in school. So I thought, well, I can be a math teacher. So let's go explore that route. I was living in Calgary at the time. So I applied to the Faculty of Education at the University of Calgary, which was actually quite life-altering, as it turns out. As part of the program, you're placed obviously in schools as a practicum, but also they give you a work placement. And I don't know how I won the lottery, but I was placed with the Galileo Educational Network. And at the time, they were founded to help support the mandate the province of Alberta issued in 1997 to integrate technology in all classrooms. And so that was a bit daunting for a lot of teachers, and Galileo kind of sprung out of that. And so the main focus of the organization was to help teachers implement technology and inquiry-based learning into the classrooms. After I graduated, I was fortunate to be hired, and I worked with them for several years. And my main role was in mathematics, because I had achieved a secondary math certification. So my main role was with the math fairs and then a math lesson study project. The math fairs, as you can see here, really great experience of connecting mathematicians with teachers, and then creating a math fair environment at schools where the students are the experts, and they engage their teachers and their fellow students and their parents, and they lead them through some really rich tasks. The one in the middle is the sort of knowledge where you have to kill a three-headed dragon, and then you have other ones, tiling, and then a lot of card tricks. And then the lesson study, I was thinking back on this, it was, I graduated in 2002, and then I was sitting in this lesson study thinking this would make an amazing PhD one day. And lo and behold, almost 20 years later, I'm finally doing it. So never give up. So I met Chris. I Googled U of Ottawa because I was living in Ottawa at the time. And I just started reading some of the work she was doing. And as she said, we really are aligned. And she agreed to take me on, which was really great. And my timing aligned perfectly with the OAME Grade 9 Applied Project, which needless to say was very influential. Like listening to Chris share the problems, and then listening to Amy, how clearly it's influenced my teaching and my understanding of professional learning is so obvious. So I was an RA, as she described. I was fortunate to be placed with 2 different PLCs. So I really got to see some differences and some similarities. And then as my role, as she described, I was supporting and documenting their learning, but also just learning so much myself at the same time. So following my MA, I was hired by the OAME to continue developing the Math for the Nines resource, which was a really great opportunity. So my MA research focused on describing the experiences of one of these PLCs as participants worked collaboratively to examine and enhance their own practices. Was driven by 2 research questions: how is a PLC formed and sustained, and how does it evolve? And the second one being, what happens when teachers come together to discuss, dissect, and reflect on their own practice? So some of the findings really quickly, shared leadership, shared beliefs, willingness, and opportunities to collaborate were some of the key findings in terms of how a PLC is formed and sustained and how it evolves. I have a few quotes here. You can see I've been influenced by Chris too on how to do slideshows. It takes courage to suddenly throw out the old and start in with something new, but I truly applaud their ability to do that. This is the principal talking. But it's a lot easier when you're doing it all together. And when I'm at the table, they go, well, what happens if this doesn't work? And I say, well, we all learn. What's to lose? I did have a different quote in there, but Chris had used it already. So I switched it. And then as well, the principal, she talked about how the work of a PLC actually influenced the school as a whole. So to paraphrase her, she found funding to make new and sustain and support new PLCs in different subject areas within the school because of the success of other PLCs. So it very much emerges as a model to support learning within a school, not just something to do, is this collaborative professional learning. And then what happens when the teachers come together. Just this idea of pushing up against other ideas. When we sit in our own classroom, I mean, we often reflect on what worked and what didn't, but when we present our ideas to our colleagues, we can often get a challenge, which ends up enhancing our learning. And that was one of the key findings from my particular study. And this quote's just reflecting that. I do think he has some slightly different opinions than I do about certain things, and that's good. We bring those different things to the table. So for me, my MA research, it provided me the opportunity to work with teachers, as did my work with Galileo. But in terms of research, I wasn't just researching them, I was learning with them. And I really took that away from the study. And I gained a deeper understanding of professional learning, the crucial aspect of teacher agency. That teachers are the one that should be guiding their own learning. And when they're given the time and space to do that, it's amazing what can come out of it. And so this work has really enhanced my own practice and informed my own research. Like I said, I have those two dual roles. So I teach two different courses at the University of Ottawa. The first one is called Enhancing Math and Science Thinking, and it's generally PJ and IS teacher candidates who don't necessarily have a specialization in math. Especially the PJ students, I have them write a reflection the first day about their own experiences as math learners, and I've had reflections handed back to me that said, I'm afraid of this course and I'm afraid of you. I'm terrified of math. You know, I hope to just build some sort of confidence through this course. And so the OAME project really informed my teaching of this particular subset of students with this mindset, because it's not unlike students in grade 9 applied mathematics. They don't necessarily love math. And so I incorporated so many of the problems, and I adopted the 5 Practices book and the Joe Bowler mathematical mindsets. Those are my texts for the course. And it just completely influenced how I teach and approach, just trying to build comfort and with these teacher candidates who will be teaching math to students. The second course is the teaching math at the senior level. So complete opposite group of students in the sense that they're mathematicians, physicists, engineering graduates, and they love math and they don't quite understand how someone can't love math. And so this picture for me is I was looking through my pictures from last year. This was March 14th of last year. So the very last day we were ever face to face, which kind of breaks my heart that we're not doing this anymore, but we will be again. But this is a picture of Al, who is a teacher in the Ottawa area and was part of the OAME study. And the students are my students. So he is, and we had visited his class. So my students were able to sit in on his grade 10 applied and his grade 12 vectors and calculus course and just be part of his thinking classroom. And then we modeled the thinking classroom in my classroom. So for me, this picture represents the nestedness of the learning that emerged from the OAME project. Al is teaching my students, who will go on to teach their own students, hopefully being influenced in some way by the work that was generated from the OAME project. And you can see some of the key hallmarks of a thinking classroom. He has his playing cards there that he used to sort the kids, the students, and then they're of course at their vertical non-permanent surfaces. And I know that he's influencing these students because in the teacher evaluation, one of them, several commented, but one in particular said her experience in Al's class and speaking to Al, and then another teacher who came in to talk about assessment, was the most influential aspect of her 2 years of the teacher program. So it's so important to engage with the teachers in the field. So this kind of influence and emergence of learning is really what is the focus of my study. So Chris mentioned Portugal, and I was fortunate enough to attend with her, and I presented a paper called Better Together, and just about my research and from the OAME and my master's thesis. So at the end, I was talking, and this is what has really set me on the course for my doctoral research. I said, you know, I'm so curious about the impact or the influence of the OAME project. How is the learning from the project, is it being sustained? Is it being diffused? And there was very, very few teachers at this study. And one of them happened to be in our working group. And she said privately to me afterwards, she said, well, you said you wanted to know about how this learning is influencing others. And she was from Oklahoma, and she said, it's influenced me. And I couldn't quite wrap my head around that. And she said, it's on Twitter. Everyone tweets, you know, what they're learning, what they're doing in the classroom. And I follow these teachers, and they've changed the way that I'm engaging in teaching. And so that just kind of blew my mind. So you'll recognize this picture. It's borrowed and with permission from Chris and Martha. And it's this understanding of the connectivity of the OAME project. And I'd like to look at the sustainability and diffusion from that project. So I'm kind of using it, and so it was this idea of this cross-pollination. This one quote, it really stuck with me. I think that it's nice that we were able to cross-pollinate with other schools at the anchor sessions, because this is where that came from. I think that the cross-pollination this project has provided really got what we needed into our school board. And then another teacher, it completely changed the way she was thinking about approaching teaching. And so that had really got me thinking about, well, what does it look like now, 5 years after the project has ended? And so I'm trying to apply a complexity theory lens to think about this. So nested within the OAME project are the PLCs who influenced each other and in turn influenced the project as a whole. As Chris was saying, they started to cross collaborate, and that wasn't an intention of the project, but the project adapted to fit the needs of the teachers. And does that influence the MathEd community? And does it influence the ed community as a whole, and vice versa? So I feel it's a huge undertaking that I hope to grab onto. And with Chris's guidance, I feel pretty confident that that I'll be able to get some deeper answers to these questions that I have. So I couldn't do it without the teachers, and they're sharing their wisdom and knowledge of practice with me, and I'm forever grateful for them letting me into their classrooms. And that's it from me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Carly, Amy, and Kelly, and of course, Chris, for bringing all these very diverse perspectives into the mix here. So we are at a stage here where we could probably jump right into the breakout rooms. We're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule, but you know, it's always good to have a little bit of extra time to have these conversations. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to share the instructions for accessing the breakout rooms. So we haven't opened them up yet. But I'm just going to get this on the screen. And just a technical note, for those who are using an older version of Zoom, you may have some trouble choosing the breakout room yourself. So it is open. You can go to either of the 3 breakout rooms. But if you are using an older version of Zoom, you might need to make a request to Kara in order to be placed into the room.
So, yeah, I'll be hanging out in the main room for anybody that needs help, and I'll do my best. We do have a great audience today in terms of numbers, so thank you for your patience in advance. And so to reiterate, we have Carly in room 1, Amy in room 2, and Kelly in room 3. And I'm going to send our co-hosts there. And this is just a quick reminder to our lovely presenters, if you could start recording in the breakout rooms. This is the time we're getting you to help out. Thank you so much.
And it's a chance for discussion or further questions to each of them. And yeah. enjoyed the
Exactly. Thank you,
discussion.
Chris. Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
thank you. Here we go. So for those, just to reiterate, for those of you, there should be an icon at the bottom that says breakout rooms, and hopefully it's allowing you to choose where you would like to go.
I think half of the folks have gone in.
Yeah, and I'm just keeping my eye on my chats. I think everyone is making their way through. Room 2, Bubet. Let's just go to your name here. Assign. Oh, 2. Sorry, Shirley, are you asking me to send you somewhere? Did you want to put up numbers? Which number? Number 1, 2? What do you? All right. Sorry, I know I can't hear you. So just 3. Okay, Shirley, you're going to 3. If that's, hope that's okay.
Chris, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
In the moment we have before people come back. You had that list of the 6 top resources the teachers were using to inform their instruction.
Yeah, that's like 15 years ago, though. Mhm.
Oh, do you have any sense of how many teachers are using original to brain function and learning to inform their instruction now?
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of literature out there, and I think that it's making its way to teachers. Yes.
Are they? Do you know if they're embracing it, or it's just sort of filtering down through?
Yeah, I don't have any data to support it, but I know that it's definitely in their talk. So
Well, that's encouraging.
That's, yeah.
All right, I hope everyone had a great, I'm sure it was a very interesting breakout sessions. I hope to hear about them. I will be watching them on YouTube later so that I can also see what happened. And then, but I am going to pass the baton back to Chris again to help us with the agenda.
Okay, sure. So I just thought we'd take a couple of minutes to do a bit of debrief. And it was nice to see so many people engaged in the breakout session. So I think maybe it would be helpful. So you might have questions or comments, but maybe we'll deal with the comments first of all from the breakout groups. I wonder whether anybody, let's say from breakout group number 1, might want to share what were some important ideas that you felt came from the discussion, or any ideas. They don't have to be important. Anybody in the first group like to share? So the first group being somebody in Carly's group. Is everybody muted? So are they?
Yes, so everyone has ability to unmute themselves right now.
Oh, do they? Okay, thank you very much. I was hoping that was the reason nobody spoke up.
I'll speak.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think Carly answered the question really well. I asked her about her phrase, children learning math or using math to learn, and she rooted that back into her research very well. And I think we were all thinking about the same sort of thing, which is parents managing their children's learning, which might be slightly different to what they'd expect. And also, how did Carly manage the teachers' use of the textbook and the teachers' use of their assessment of their children to give them exactly what they needed?
Mm-hmm.
I think our discussion maybe was a little short. We could have gone on for a few more minutes.
Oh, could you? Okay.
But it was really rich and valuable.
Great.
I learned a lot.
That's great. Right. Pauline, I see you have your hand up too.
Yes, thank you. I was impressed by Kelly's notation of paying students' mental health, because I'm a firm believer of holistic teaching. So holistic teaching not only pay attention to student academic achievement, but also pay attention to emotional, social, psychological needs, and cultivate students' attributes and cultivate students' physical and spiritual attributes. So I was a strong supporter for mental well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline.
You're welcome.
Any other big ideas from group number 1 that you'd like to share?
One of the things that came up was that parents were much more accepting of the flexibility that Carly was bringing to the pedagogy than her colleagues were. Where she had lots and lots of resistance from her colleagues, but almost none. She cited one example over all the years from parents, which is sort of disturbing, I think.
These things take time. Great.
And every year that we miss is another 10,000, 100,000 kids. That
Yeah, I'm not
so
I'm
it's
not
sad.
putting it off. Yeah. Okay, why don't I move to group number 2, and if I could get somebody to volunteer to share some of the ideas that you got out of the discussion in group number 2. And it could be your own personal takeaway. I'm trying to man the chat too here.
A hand up from
Okay, thank you.
Illinois Hill.
Illinois Hill.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah.
Go ahead. Illinois Hall.
There we go. Here, sorry, I'm just going to unmute you. 1 sec. Ask to unmute. There we go. Can you unmute there? Is it letting you? There we go.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I think I mispronounced your name.
It's actually Illinois.
Okay.
So we spoke about equity, and some of the top stuff that I found was around mental health and how we can get that into the classroom, especially as it relates to assessment that Chris spoke about earlier. And we know that assessment does contribute to mental health issues for students, especially those who have experienced mathematics anxiety. So our facilitator did mention some alternative ways that we could use to assess students, which I found very good. And now I'm back in the classroom, so it's really exciting, and I'm going to try out a few of those, of course. And I really, really enjoyed the use of the Instagram because with so much things going on, and we are now moved practically to online learning, and a lot of students have a lot of time on their hands and are using social media for the wrong reasons. So it's very good and a creative way for us to actually make use of the social media in the classroom setting, and to allow our students to connect and to relate to something that they really like and enjoy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with comments from group 2? Watching for hands and chats and.
Yeah, I don't have a hand.
Okay, good. Jeff.
I just put the comment, some people, it's okay. Some people might be shocked to hear, and I wasn't, but because I've taught high school, that grade 9, Amy was talking about the fact that grade 9 students were expressing, considering suicide because they were the first math quiz was approaching. And that was a high part of anxiety, which Illinois just mentioned, but I just wanted to reinforce that.
Yeah, it's just, we really need to think about assessment, don't we? And the messages we give kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, huge.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have another takeaway from that session.
Yeah.
It was that Amy had shared some really open assessment prompts and some of the student replies that were quite exciting, because students just found these connections between different topics in their course and were very creative in how they expressed like a summary of things they had learned through the year. So that was really interesting of just how I'm sure that students were really quite excited to share those.
Nice, good. Yeah, it's Amy, my guess is those are the kinds of things that shift the assessment culture, huh? And make students less afraid of sharing what they know and can do. Yeah. Any other comments from group 2? Okay, how about group 3, Kelly's group? And shout out if I missed somebody who had something to say about group 2. People with messages from Kelly's group, what was some of that conversation about? What were some of your takeaways?
I was more asking for advice.
I can.
No. Martha,
I
yeah,
can
go.
share a little bit.
Okay, great, Martha.
One of the things that came up right at the beginning was Kelly's work in complexity, and various people talking about work they'd been doing with complexity, where that might take them, kind of just how they were thinking about it. So I thought that was a great opportunity to dig into a huge area that a number of people are touching on in different ways.
That is great. And it's an area that often people, I don't mean question, but they probe quite a bit, especially some of your other committee members, but we won't mention them.
Yeah. It takes some convincing, but it was helpful too, because Joyce was talking about a study they're currently doing about sustainability. So I'm really grateful to make that connection. Yes.
Yeah, so let me just talk then about that.
Great, let me hear it.
Okay, so I mean, you know, our study in Tanzania, Chris, with Elaine and Florence. So we're doing follow-up now of all the participants that, for everybody who's not here, I should say, we actually presented this work at Fields, one of the research days. So we had a development study to build capacity in mathematics teaching, and worked with various stakeholders in rural areas in Tanzania and university. But I don't want to take away from Kerry's work and talk about my work. But what similarities that we found is this follow-up of what happened. But I think we talked about some of the conditions of the complexity in the PLC that you were involved. You know, diversity, for example, that is very important. Putting people with coming from different, administrator, teacher, special educator in at one point. And we talked about the neighboring interactions, enough to bump ideas, the things that came up from, neighboring ideas actually, that PLC would connect and something like that. So we got talking about now following up. One of the things, we are finding out, and you might find out, is this different networks now growing from the ones that were in the PLC. So if you follow the people, you find they're building a different network, but it looks like what you've been working, but it's different in qualitatively, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's why we've been talking. And I'm interested in this work that Kelly is going to be working on.
That's great. Probably helped a lot to chat through that.
Yeah. Take some of the load off Chris. Oh.
Any other comments? No. And were there any burning questions or last minute comments or questions? Call it a day. It always amazes me, all the people who show up on a Saturday. It's great to have these conversations.
If there are no comments, then maybe I have to say personally, I really enjoyed the day, and congratulations again, Chris.
Thank you, Joyce.
The award, and thank you for bringing these wonderful talks to kind of complement or support, or I don't know, supplement, and I don't know how the word, but your work, and that shows up how your work really goes beyond just the research. It's in there, it's in the practice. We can see that, and it's really nice to see that. Oops. So
thank you.
Yeah, personally, I'm just saying thank you and congratulations.
Thank you very much. Great.
And I'd like to thank Larry and his family and Margaret's friends and for the establishment of this award. And I'd like to thank the Fields for supporting it. I'd also like to thank all the people who sent in nomination packages and the adjudicators who read through all those packages. And I really want to thank you, Chris, because what struck me most was the diversity of the research and yet the commonality of some of the findings. And I think that's quite remarkable. So I just want to thank everybody who was involved in putting today together. I want you to know that Chris did an awful lot of the legwork herself. And so thank you very much, Chris, for being a co-organizer of today.
Thanks so much. Thanks to everybody. It was a good day, and I can relax now. So thanks so much for coming, and thanks so much for all the connections that we always have. Thanks especially to Amy and Kelly and to Carly for joining us today. It's a different environment, and you took the risk, so that's great. Really appreciated what you brought to the table. So take care, guys.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Hey, Chris, let me ask you a question about assessment anxiety. Do we find that in other subjects besides math?
I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question, but it's a good question to consider. Maybe anyone who's left might know.
Well, Peter, I had anxiety for writing papers, but not math.
Okay.
You know, like I was very comfortable in the mathematics classroom and the science classroom, but you put me in social studies and I cheated. I can remember cheating in grade 8, which is like a big thing for me to admit. Like I'm ashamed, but I cheated on a social studies test in grade 8 because I was so afraid of doing poorly.
I'm going to call your teacher.
He found out, but I cried. And so he didn't punish me, which is a whole other story.
So gender advantages, maybe.
Made me a little skeptical of the whole education system. I'm gonna say that was sort of my first. Wait a minute.
I think there is like test anxiety that isn't
Yes.
just math test anxiety.
Yeah.
But there is either it gets a lot of attention because it's math, and math education gets a little bit more attention than science education right now, or physics education, or anything else specific. The sciences.
Is that, sorry, Amy, is that because like calculus is used as a hoop for kids to get into university courses, possibly?
There are a few things, right? Like everybody has to take a lot more math than they have to take any other subject except English. There's a lot of literacy education research right now. And I think it's partly a pragmatics issue. Where's the funding? What's the need in the classroom? What are people talking about and worried about? What are parents worried about? And people are talking about math, and that's what's getting a lot of attention. But
yeah, but I think like Jennifer Holm, if she was here, she would just have said something about this, because I think we have to know that anxiety is also a clinical kind of really mental health problem. So we use loosely math anxiety, but there are people who do have really clinical anxiety as a mental disease, right? So when Peter, when you ask that, well, that's a mental disease. That's well-known anxiety people have with different kinds of things that happen in their lives. But then when Jennifer is really points out, it just reminds me all the time, Jennifer Holmes, that to be careful when we use this word with math anxiety, because is it clinical, or is it just somebody, you know?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think some students like math tests because they think, you know, there's right and wrong and it's objective. And those students don't like English tests where they feel that it's the teacher's own judgment if she liked it or didn't like it. But I think that one of the things that math has going against it is, I think, largely our tests measure what students don't know rather than measuring what students do know, and the students know that. Like, you're looking to see what the students don't know. And that's just not a very nice feeling,
That's a very interesting comment, Judy. And I think you're right.